Today is July 18th, 2007. I am Jessica Clark. It is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Bismarck, North Dakota. To start with, can you please state your full name?
Peter Nagel,
And where were you born, Peter?
Linton, North Dakota,
When were you born?
in 1929.
Did you ever hear a story about your birth?
I don't think so. I don't remember if I did. I don't think so.
Okay. Do you know if a midwife or a doctor was present?
I'm sure it was a midwife.
Do you go by Pete or Peter?
I go either. Sometimes Pete, sometimes Peter. Most of the time, Peter.
Were you named after anybody?
Yes, my grandfather.
Oh, did you know your grandfather?
Did I know my grandfather? Oh, yes. I stayed there for 3 years when I went to high school.
Okay, was this your father's father?
It was my mother's parents,
What were their names?
Peter and Magdalena Zacher, Z-A-C-H-E-R.
And did they come over from Russia?
Yes, they did. But it was unfortunate. We never asked them. I never talked about it, and they never told us. So
Well, you said that you were close to them when you were growing up, or you stayed with them for a while. Can you tell me a little bit about what your grandfather was like?
he was a mild, gentle person. I don't ever remember him arguing with his wife because she was always right. That was the kind of person that he was. He was just a yes, ma'am, yes, yes. But he was a gentle person. And I say that because every once in a while he'd give you a nickel a nickel was probably the most you got from him. But yes, he was a nice person. Great.
And your grandmother, what type of a person?
Well, she was a little firm. I think she was a little. She was her maiden name. Well, I won't say what her maiden name was, but she was a little tougher than I'd like to have her been. But that's the way it was.
So when you were staying up there with them, what type of things would you do with them?
Play cards was the only thing that we probably did. We never went to visit. Well, we visited the neighbors, of course, and of course you walked next door or wherever it was, maybe a block or two away. But the most important thing we had, the thing that I did there was church was what I grew up with. Had to go to church at 6:30 in the morning because mass started at 7. Of course, we had to be there an hour before church started. And this was when I went to high school. I was the only kid in high school that went to church at 6:30 in the morning. And then, of course, church let out at 7:30. I went home and had breakfast, I guess. And then the other mass was at 8 o'clock. So I was really the only kid in high school that went to the 6:30 mass because I had to I lived with my grandparents.
So you were raised Catholic then?
Yes.
What church did you go to with your grandparents?
Well, with my grandparents, we went to St. Peter and Paul's Church in Strasbourg. But where I grew up, it was called St. Bernard's. It was a mission church out in the country. It was a basement church. It wasn't it was a basement church, but it's called Kotzebuch in German.
Can you say that again?
Kotzebuch. I don't really know Winona area is where it was, but where they got the name Kotzebuch, I don't know. But that was a church. St. Bernard's was the name of the church.
So can you tell me what Mass was like when you were growing up?
Oh boy, we always were. I always hated to stay home from church because I don't know if there was a cloud in the sky, I was always afraid it was going to be storming or something. And where I grew up, that was nothing uncommon to have a storm, at least a hailstorm, or not a nice rainstorm. We never had anything like that. Usually a hailstorm or drought or whatever. Anyway, on Sundays we'd go to church and we'd always prepare for about 2 hours. Our church, I think, was usually around 10 o'clock in the morning, and it lasted until about 12 because this priest that we had, or all the priests we had, they always liked to talk a lot. Their sermons was at least 45 minutes long, so you knew you were going to be gone 2 hours. That was our Sunday morning.
So after church service, would there be some type of social event at the house? Or?
No, you'd stop probably and visit a little amongst the people that you knew there. And but no, there was nothing social because we didn't have the room. It was just a big hall where the church was, and but after the church, the priest left, and of course everybody went home then. But and those days, everything was in Latin too, you know. So as a child, you didn't understand what was going on. Well, then finally, when they changed to English, you know, that was the greatest thing that the church ever did was translate to English instead of what was going on in Latin.
So, as a child, did you enjoy going to church? Did they have a way of making it enjoyable for a young?
Well, that was one of our outings. We never had much. Every once in a while, we'd probably get to go along to town. We lived like 20 miles or more from the nearest town. So when we got to go someplace, it was a treat. And church was one of the treats that was, you know, you got to dress up too on a Sunday morning. You dress up, you know, your white shirt and the best clothes you had, you'd wear on the Sunday. So going to church was actually, for me, a treat to get to go along. If I didn't get to go along, I had to stay home and finish what chores were to be done or cook dinner. Dinner had to be done by the time they came home. Well, you saw them about 2 miles, you saw them coming, so you got the dinner food ready so they could come in off of the car into the house and sit down and eat. That's how it was when I grew up. That was our Sunday custom.
So you said a car. They had a car then that they would drive to?
Oh yes, we always had a car. Valet, and then there was a 19, I remember 36 Ford, I think, and 41 Ford and 47 Ford. Oh yeah, we always had a car. But you had to have, if you wanted to go someplace, you had to have an automobile to get there because it was so far from wherever you wanted to go.
So when you were a child, how far was the country church from your home?
7 miles. And the roads were like a cow path.
So in the winters, how would you get there then?
We didn't. Well, if the roads were completely blocked, we didn't go to church. We went to Fort Yates then. And oftentimes, most of the time, we could go to Fort Yates because it was prairie and the roads were not blocked. There was no road, so you'd probably have to go around the snowbank or something. But to get to Fort Yates, we could usually go there in the wintertime.
And how far was that?
I think around 10 miles, right across the river, of course, across the ice.
So you said you grew up 20 miles from the nearest town. Was that Linton was the nearest town?
Yeah, Linton and Strasburg, about the same.
And then when you went to live with your grandparents for high school, did they actually live in the town of Strasburg?
They lived in the town of Strasburg, yes. And my folks would take me in like on a Saturday night, or my brothers, they were probably dating or something, and they'd go to Strasburg and they'd drop me off on a Sunday night. And on a Friday night, they would probably pick me up. Strasburg usually had a dance on Friday nights, and I'd have to stay there. Usually my brothers would pick me up on a Friday night, but after the dance was out, which was like 1:30 in the morning. So I'd have to either sit on the car or whatever until the dance was over with, and then I could go home with them.
So how old were you when you started high school?
I suppose around 14, 15, I suppose.
Were all of the children in your family able to go to high school?
No, I was the first one. I had 2 older brothers. They never went to high school. And then, of course, after that, my folks moved to town after I went into the service. My folks moved to the city, to Bismarck. And then, of course, the other 4, they got to go to high school.
So can you tell me what high school was like when you were a child?
High school was not pleasant for me because we were so poor. And then, like I say, I stayed with my grandparents for the whole week. I don't know. My high school days were not pleasant. They weren't joyful when I think back, because of the fact that I grew up poor and stuff like that. So I never got to take advantage of, like most other kids, other boys. They had their cars and stuff like that, and I didn't. And another thing was my grandparents. They went to bed at 9 o'clock. Well, I had to be home. Usually, go to bed at 9 o'clock. Because that's where I stayed. I had to do as they said. Otherwise, I suppose my parents, who knows what would have happened. Anyway, that was not a good thing. I would not. Grandparents are nice, but that wasn't. They were okay.
So, since you were a farm kid going into the town school, did the town kids ever pick on you because you were a farm kid?
No, they never did. No, I was never harassed or anything like that. No.
Did you ever participate in any sports activities?
No, I did not either because we didn't do it in grade school. So as far as basketball of any kind, we never had a basketball or a hoop or anything to play with. So when I went to high school, no. But I suppose I could have, participated in basketball, but I did not. I only did what I almost had to do, I guess is what you might say.
So, what type of classes did you take?
Well, I took the usual English and math, I suppose, and math, geometry, or what's that other one? It's math too, but it's in high school they call it algebra. Algebra, yeah. I liked algebra, but chemistry I wasn't too fond of, and English I was never fond of, and but the best subject I liked was typing. When I took typing, I never had to take an exam because if you had a 93 average, you'd have to take an exam. And that was the only exam I never had to take because I loved typing. And if I had the push, so to speak, in my parents or something, if I could have played the accordion or piano or something, I think my fingers would have been for that. But I never had the opportunity. I probably could have done good at that because I did good in typing. I loved typing, but that's the way it was. So I was not in band either or anything like that because, for one thing, we couldn't afford. I suppose you had to rent the instruments. I don't know. I could never buy one because we couldn't afford it. So I was never in band either. So I missed out on a lot of good stuff in high school.
When you were living at your grandparents', did you have chores that you had to do for them?
Well, yeah, we had water. See, they didn't have running water, so we had to get the water from a pump, a well outside. And I think their coal, they heated their house with coal, and I believe the coal was in some kind of a garage or shed, whatever. We had to get the coal from there, and of course the ashes and stuff like that. But that was about it for chores.
Let's see. Were you the only grandchild that was rooming with them at that time?
Yes, I was the only grandchild of theirs that was rooming with them because none of my cousins. I was the only cousin in both sides of my family to go to high school. I was the first cousin and the first one in our family to go to high school in both my mother and dad's relatives. So I guess you might say the fortunate one.
So then at the time you were living with them, it was just you and your grandparents?
Yes, it was, right. Mm-hmm.
Did you have your own room at that time?
Yes, I did. I had a room, yeah. It was just maybe a bed and a chest or whatever. Nothing fancy. No TV, no radio, nothing like that either.
So you mentioned that you would play cards with them for fun. What type of game?
Whist was the card game. We didn't play pinochle then yet, but whist was the only card game that I ever remember playing with them, and that was the only card game they ever played.
What did they do for a living?
Well, they were retired farmers. I don't know. My grandfather retired probably at a pretty young age, but I think what he kept probably the land, and his boys or his sons probably were farming, and that paid him, as far as I remember.
Can you describe the house that they had?
The house was, I think, if I remember right, something like a 3-bedroom. It had a kitchen, and it had 2 bedrooms, and that was it, as far as I remember. It had a basement, but no, it didn't have. It had a what do they call a dirt floor downstairs, where they probably keep potatoes or something like that.
Like a cellar type of
a cellar type thing, yeah. But it was dirt, and I remember I hated the place because every once in a while you'd find one of these little lizards, I guess they call them, or something like that. And that scared the heck out of me. So I never did go down there unless I absolutely had to. But there was no upstairs. There was just a one-room. This is the house.
So your grandmother, was she a good cook?
Oh yeah, yes she was. She made and on Sundays they always had something made with chicken and not sauerkraut, but cabbage and potatoes. And then on Mondays it was leftovers. That's what I ate it on Mondays, and it was the best of that, whatever they call the chicken, cabbage and potatoes mashed up because my grandma didn't have any teeth. But it was delicious. I always waited for that on Mondays. Otherwise, during the week, the rest of the week was, I don't know, but this was something I was always looked forward to. And nobody could make it like she did either. My mother couldn't make it, and my wife couldn't make it like that. It was the best, but that's the way it was.
So how old were you when they passed away?
Oh boy, I would say probably about 18. I think they passed away pretty shortly after I graduated from high school.
Do you,
I would say probably 18 maybe.
do you remember if they died of old age or was it an illness?
I think they just passed away from old age.
Do you remember their funerals at all?
No, I don't. I don't remember their funeral at all. No. I remember the body. I don't know if it was grandpa or grandma. The body was at home in their house. That was the way it was in those days. They'd embalm them and then they'd bring them back to the home until the funeral of the next, which was probably the next day. But they'd have a wake service all night at that home, in their home. And if I remember right, that was the way it was when my dad's parents passed away too. But I know they brought the body back to the home, and the wake service was the children or whoever would stay up all night, and the next day they would bury the body.
Where are your maternal grandparents buried?
The ones my mother's are buried in Strasbourg, in the cemetery in Strasbourg, right behind the church. And my father's parents are buried at Krasna, Krassna, Krasna. It's southwest of Strasbourg. There used to be a beautiful church there, and that's where they're buried. The church has now been destroyed, but that church has been destroyed. And of course, the church I went to is also destroyed.
So your mother's parents, how many children did they have?
I think about 10.
Okay. And was your mother one of the youngest, oldest?
My mother was probably the second youngest, I would think, yeah.
So was she born before they came over from Russia or after?
She was born after.
After.
I don't remember, I don't know if any of their children, I don't think any of their children were born in Russia.
Were you close to any of your mom's brothers and sisters?
Oh, yes, I was. I was close to all my brothers, my mother's sisters. I was close to them, yes. And I even, when I was teaching school one year, and I stayed with her brothers, in her brother, where her brother lived, because he was married and had a family. But I stayed there for 1 year when I was teaching their school, so I stayed there. So I got to know him quite well, too.
What was his name?
John.
And when you think back, what type of a person was he?
He was a pretty rough person with his children. He treated them pretty, especially some of them, he treated pretty harsh. But that's the way the man was. And compared to his father, he was just the complete opposite. I think he must have taken after his mother, because she was pretty harsh, and so was he. I say that, probably shouldn't say that, because I don't know, she never spanked me or anything like that, but she was pretty harsh compared to my grandfather. And then Uncle John was kind of that way too. I thought he was pretty harsh.
Were there any other aunts and uncles on your mom's side that you were close to?
Oh yes, I was close to all my mother's aunts. I mean, my mother's sisters, because they take us when they went to visit them. All of them had either a son or a daughter my age, or we usually got to go and we visited them a lot. Well, not a lot, maybe once or twice a year, but it was at least once or twice a year. And we'd always get to go along. You know, like a church feast, that was one thing that was always celebrated. And we always, for some reason, I remember I always got to go. Of course, my brothers were older at that time, you know, so they probably didn't go anymore, because 16, 17 years old, they wouldn't go along anymore. But, oh no, I remember some very fond days visiting some of my cousins, and the one especially, where one of them lived. They had a huge hill, a real big hill, and we always had to go up that hill for some. So I was, yes, and my aunts, they called you by your name, which is, you know, that's, you know, I was close to all my mother's sisters.
So did they all, because with 10 children, that's a lot, that's a big family. Did they all stay in the area when you were growing up?
Well, pretty much so within the area, like within the Linton and Strasburg area. Now, one of them moved to Hague. I remember that lived in Hague. Well, they never had any children my age, so I never got to go there because they didn't. Well, they had one son, but he wasn't my age, so I never didn't visit them too much. And but the others, yeah, they all lived in. I would say they all lived in the area, Strasburg and Linton area.
So, your mother, she was probably around the second youngest of.
I think something like that.
When you think back about well, first, what's your mother's name?
Carolina.
And when you think about your mother, how would you best describe her?
You know, that's a tough question. She was great. She was a mother. She was great. The best mother in the world. That she was. I guess that's all I can say about her. She was wonderful.
Were you close to her when you were growing up?
Well, my mother didn't have any girls. She had the last girl she had after let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5 boys. She finally had a girl. So I was a girl in the family. I did the girls' work. So I was close to my mother, yes. She taught me the tricks of the trade. My other 2 brothers are older than I. They had to go out and work in the fields, and I didn't. Every once in a while, I'd go out and help, but I was never out in the fields like they were. And then, of course, the younger ones, after that, they moved to town, and of course, then they did it. But yeah, when I grew up on the farm, I was a girl in the farm, in the household. So my mother, whatever she did, that's what I was. When they left, I had to do the cooking for my brothers, whoever was around. And I guess when you said, was I close to my mother? Yes, I was. I was her daughter.
So you said that you would help her in the kitchen. What types of things besides the cooking? What other types of chores would you do for her?
Well, I had to scrub the floors. I remember that. And about once or twice a year, I suppose they washed down the walls. I had to do some of that. And whatever painting, I suppose I had to help. But well, of course, I had to milk cows and all that stuff too. And we made our own butter. In those days, we made our own butter. That all had to be done. And bread, I baked bread for her when she'd make the dough. And if they went to town for something that day, and the bread was made, the dough was made, I had to either redo the dough or knead the dough and wait until it rises and then put it in pans. Or if she had it in pans, I had to wait until it rose and then put it in the oven and stuff like that. That was some of the things that we had to do whether she was home or whether they left. My mother had a lot of, I don't know what, probably migraine headaches, because I remember she had a lot of headaches, and many times she went and laid down because she was so sick. That I remember, and she never got it cured. I don't know what, after they moved to town. In 1951 is when I left home, is when I went into the service. And then, of course, after that, they moved to town. From after that, I don't know. I don't remember. Didn't do much. I didn't have no contact with her as far as, living at home, because after I got out of the service, I got married, and of course then we went on our own. But up until 1951, this is what I did in the household. When I went to high school, of course, I was gone from September to whenever school let out, May, I suppose. And then and I did that, of course, until 1947. I graduated in 1947, and then I went to Allendale that summer to the school, college over there. And then that fall, I taught school, in which we probably had 6 months of school. And in those days, we probably had, the school year was probably around 6 months. And I was gone, of course, I was gone when I taught school, except for 1 year I was teaching in the area, and then I stayed home and commuted to that school. But other than that, that was after high school for 4 years. And then after that, in 1951, I was drafted into the service, and I left home in 51. And of course, when I got back in 53, they had moved to the city. But until I was probably 14 years old, till I started high school, actually, that's when I was my mother's daughter.
Let's turn to your father's side of the family.
Okay.
Did you know your grandparents on that side?
I knew my grandparents, but I didn't know them. I didn't know them like I knew my other grandparents.
What were their names?
The grandfather's name was Elias, and the mother's name, his wife's name was Otilia.
How far did they live from your farm?
From our farm, about 15 miles.
When you were a child, did you see them?
Not very often, because I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember. I remember sometimes, but nothing like. No, I just remember where they lived, and I just know that my grandfather on my dad's side was not as gentle as my mother's dad was, but I don't remember. I don't know much about them. My two older brothers were much more familiar with them than I was.
How about your grandmother? Do you remember her at all?
I can picture her in my mind, but I can't. I don't know anything.
When you picture her, can you describe what she looked like?
She looked like kind of a short, heavy-set lady, round, real round, and she always wore an apron, like along from the top to a big apron. A long dress, if I remember right, she wore a long dress. That's about all I remember about her.
How many children did they have?
I think they had about 10. I'd have to count them, but I think it's around 10.
Did they also come over from Russia?
They did, yes, they did. And the reason I know that, because on my mother's side, we had a reunion, but it wasn't publicized like this one was. I have this book from that reunion. That I know that they came from Russia, right? And they brought one child with them from Russia. One of my uncles was born over there, that they brought along over here. But my dad was not. My dad was born here in this country.
And in the age range of children, is he one of the older or one of the younger?
My dad was the second oldest.
Okay. So was your dad born?
My dad and all the others were born in the United States, yes.
Okay. So were your dad's parents, were they farmers as well?
They were farmers, yes. And as far as I know, as far as I remember from being told, that they came by train from New York to Eureka, South Dakota. And from there, some of my grandparents' friends or whatever came by wagon, horse and wagon, and picked them up at Eureka, South Dakota, and brought them up to that area where they lived and farmed.
When you think back, this can be either set of grandparents, did they speak German or did they speak English?
They never spoke English. Everything was spoken in German. In fact, I don't even think my mother's parents knew how to speak English. Now, my father's dad probably could. I don't know. No, they never spoke English, but
Your dad, when you think about him, how would you describe him?
well, I remember I never got a licking from my dad, never. Because when my dad said this, you do this, I did it because I was afraid. He was pretty stern. He was a pretty strict. He had his faults, like everybody has, and the reason I say that is because I remember, and I'll never forget. We were driving home from town one day. He always liked to stop in and have a little snort. And on the way home, he was going pretty fast. And my mother said, "Don't drive so fast." So he went down to probably 5 miles an hour, you know. And I remember, I'll never forget that. But that was my dad.
So, do you know how your parents met?
I really don't think I do. I suppose somebody said, "Hey, here's a girl." I really don't remember. I know my two older brothers would. I don't really know. I don't know how they met. Whether they were what do they call that in German? Kupla is what they call it in German. I don't know what the word is. Brought, brought to matchmaking. That's probably how they met. I don't know. But I do know that when my dad, in the wintertime, I know that he told us about that. When he'd go and visit her by horseback, one time he visited her by horseback, and a blizzard came up, and he left and rode home. And on the way, it was so bad, the blizzard was so bad he couldn't see, so he just let his horse run. And when all of a sudden the horse stopped, and here he was right in front of the barn. That's how those animals did it in those days. But I remember that was about the only story that I remember. But about his courting days.
When you think back to your childhood, how would you describe how your parents worked together as a couple?
Oh, I think they had to work together as a couple because, like I say, we never had a decent crop. We either got hailed out or drought or whatever. I remember one time the grasshoppers were so bad you couldn't even see the sun. It was a haze. The grasshoppers were so bad. And so for them to survive, they had 6 or 8, well, they had a total of 8 children. 2 of them passed away. But they had 8 children, and to survive like that, they had to work together. They had to work together as a team because there's no other way that they could have survived.
What type of farmers were they?
Well, they grain farmed and stocked. They had horses and chickens and cattle, sheep. We had goats and sheep and turkeys and chickens and everything. I don't know if we ever had rabbits, but yeah, we had never farmed a lot of land, but they did farm. They did grain farm.
Do you remember what crops they planted?
Oh yeah, they planted wheat and oats and barley and corn, and that was it. We never planted nothing else. Millet, I think they planted millet because that kind of grew for hay. But those were the only crops. Those were the only crops that we planted.
You were born in 1929, right?
Yes, I was.
Do you have memories of what is known today as the Dirty 30s?
Very much so. Yes, I do. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about it?
I remember I was a young boy, and I had some little trucks that you pushed down. I remember one Christmas time I got a Caterpillar. You wind it up, and it had rubber tracks on it, and that thing had a lot of power. But I played in the sand because in the summertime, the sand would pile up in the fences like snow would pile up in the wintertime. That's how the sand piled up in the fences. The horses could walk right over the sand. That's how bad it was. And the wind would blow sometimes so bad it's like a snowstorm. You couldn't see because of the sandstorms. And of course hot, yes. And Nothing grew hardly. I remember my parents, before I think my brothers were big enough, but I remember this, that they were cutting thistles, green Russian thistles. And my mother was working, helping. She was either stacking or she was on the box, whatever she had to do. But my mother, can you imagine thistles? Now they don't, they destroy them, but they had to cut them for feed because that was the only thing that grew. So that was in the early 30s. That's, I don't know how anybody survived those years, but
You said you helped a lot with your mother's chores in the house. Was it hard for her at that time to keep the house clean with all the dirt and dust?
oh, that I don't. I was probably too young to observe that. I don't know. I would imagine. Can you imagine when it was dusty? And those windows, those days, they were not like these Anderson or Pella windows that we have now. Oh, they had to. The dust had to come in. It had to be just laying on top of the sill. But I don't remember that because I don't remember that. Okay, getting back to did they work together? Another thing that comes to my mind now is my parents always had the school teacher. We had a rural school, of course, and then we had the teacher had to stay someplace, and they usually stayed at my parents' home during the time that they were teaching school. So my parents had a little income from that too, which supported them as well as their kids. And it was another nice thing that for us, because we got to learn a little from them. They ate with us and lived with us. So and many times they wouldn't go home the weekend. So we probably picked up a few positive things from them staying there. And of course, it was a supplement of my parents' income.
Can you describe the home that you grew up in?
My home that I grew up in was a great tall house. It was a three-story house. It had a basement. We lived in the basement, but it was fixed up. The basement was fixed up. And of course, the second floor was for company only. We could go there. We hardly ever went there when my parents were home because we weren't allowed to go there. This was kept clean and separate and everything. Of course, when they went to town, when they left the farm and left us at home, we would go there. And my dad had a diary that he'd keep, and we'd snook. We'd always look through that diary. And you know what? He always knew when we did that. For some reason, it was the way he laid it down or something, but he always knew that we had snooped through his diary when he came home. But that's what we did. And of course, the upstairs, which was like 3 stories, it was 2 stories, I guess, was not finished. It was not finished, but in the summertime you couldn't go up there. It was so hot. But we slept in the basement. The boy, well, we did. My daughter, so we always slept in the basement. And it was cool there. It was cool in the summertime and warm in the wintertime. And then my folks slept on the second floor. They slept in and then we had a guest room. We never slept in the guest room. It was on a nice bed and everything. But only guests from out of town, from out of the area that came and visited us and stayed overnight got to sleep there. So that was the home that I grew up in.
When you think about the furniture, what type of furniture did you have when you were growing up?
The one that probably everybody had was a table that had the metal rim around the side. And of course, the legs were metal. And the chairs was that way too. It had a thick padding, but the chairs were made of metal. And I think everybody in North Dakota had one of those tables at one time, or still has probably. And that's the kind of table we had. I don't remember if we had it. Yeah, we had. I think in this guest room, we had a kind of a pretty big room that was only a guest room. It had a Davenport, and I think a chair, and of course then the bedroom was separate from the guest room. This is now on the middle floor, and the furniture up there was well kept. I knew the chairs up there, the table was varnished and all that. The hardwood chairs and the table was hardwood, but it was always well kept. This was the guest floor, And but in the basement we had just a regular knock-around furniture. We had the stove was that coal stove or wood stove. What do they call it? Hard metal, iron, with a water tank in the back, probably about a 10 gallon. And that when the stove was on, it would heat the water back there, so we'd always have warm water in this stove. We'd have the separator, the cream separator. We'd have it in the basement too, because in the wintertime, everything we'd have to put it in where it didn't freeze up. And even our coal bin, we had a coal bin in the basement for the heat of the house. And I'm sure that when they brought a truckload of coal in and unloaded it, it was unloaded by shovel. I'm sure there was a lot of dust that was created from there, and I don't know where it went, but it had to go someplace. It didn't go out the window where it came in. But anyway, these are the things that we put up as we grew up. We didn't have of course, we didn't have a refrigerator because we had no electricity until 1948 maybe. I think is when we finally got the electricity. So we had no refrigerator. We had no running water. We never had running water as long as I grew up out on the farm.
So where was the bathroom?
About a half a block away from the house, outside, in a little toilet, little shack. It was a two-holder, if I remember right. Because we never had to have more than two people. There was never more than. Why they had two people? Because I suppose, well, I won't even mention that. Why it was a two-holder? I guess there was a reason for that.
Let's see here. How many beds were in the house?
Well, there were at least four. There was one bed in the guest room that was never used except guests, and then my parents had their own. And then downstairs we had two of them in one room, two beds that me and my brother slept in.
And you said that your parents had 8 children?
Yeah. Okay. Two of them that passed away when they were smaller, but they had a total of 8 children, yeah.
How did the 2 pass away?
I think the one had, what do they call that sickness that the little child gets? It was a little child that had, it wasn't pneumonia, something like that, I think. And the other, I think they both had something like that. They weren't very old when, I know the girl was in her infant and the boy was maybe a couple of years old. I remember when the girl was funeral, we had a car. The car that we had was a Model A Ford, and we took the child in the coffin, in the car to the church. I remember that.
How old were you?
I probably had to be 4 or 5, 6 maybe, something like that. But I remember that. And I don't know why. Whether I can remember that, and I can't remember how everybody fit into that car. We all had to probably be in that car to go to church to bury this child. But I remember from the home, we took it to the church, and then from there we took it to the cemetery. And I don't remember that. I just remember going from the home to the church, and I don't remember the other stuff is blank.
And were both of the children that passed away younger than you?
Yes. The boy was had to be probably about 2 years younger than I was. Because I remember he was between me and my other brother that's alive. He was in between there, and there's about 4 years difference between me and my brother that's alive. So this one that passed away was probably 2 years. So I was probably 2 years old or whatever.
So can you take me from your oldest brother, or the oldest sibling, all the way to your youngest one?
Yeah.
Their names?
Okay, Sebald is the oldest. And right now he's 83 years old. And my sister is Dolores. I believe she's about 65. And well, what else do you want to know?
Those are the only ones that are alive today?
Yeah, they're both alive. One lives in Fargo. Well, no, well, right now she lives in Fargo, right? And my brother lives in Linton. There, he's a retired farmer, and my sister is retired, but she didn't. She never worked. I mean, she never worked.
So how many boys, how many girls were there?
There were 6 boys and 2 girls, and there's still five. 5 boys are left, and one daughter, one girl.
So what was it like growing up in a household with that many children?
Okay, I can only remember vaguely 2 of my older brothers and my younger brother than I am. Uh, my 2 older brothers, I remember that they were working outside. If there was something to go, they had to go outside and do it. All the chores had to be done, other than milking. I had to help milk and stuff like that, to separate the milk and stuff. I had to help, but anything like with the horses, they were the ones that were doing it, and out in the field, they were the ones that had to do it. So I had very little contact in the summertime with them, other than eating or something like that, because they were out there and I was in the kitchen. My sister, or my other brother, uh, the only thing I remember about Gilbert, his name is Gilbert, by the way, he went to a seminary, and that's about all I remember about him. That he was gone in the seminary for a couple of years at least. As far as working together with him, I don't remember much about him. And then, of course, I had another brother that was younger than he was, and my sister, and I don't remember much about them. But my 2 older brothers, my older brother, he was strict, boy. I know one time I was going to be a big guy, and I used a 4-letter word. Boy, he let me have it. Boy, did he let me have it. And maybe today is why I don't ever use a cuss word. But I remember that he let me have it. And my other brother, the second oldest brother, he was kind of like my grandfather, I think. I think my oldest brother I could probably say that he was like my dad's dad, or my dad, pretty harsh. And then my other brother, he was kind of easygoing, like my mother's dad. Never a hard word, rough word or anything like that. And I think that's between my older brother and my other brother, my 2 oldest brothers. That's how I describe those 2. He was my other brother, the older one than I am. Not the oldest, the other one. He was, like I say, easygoing. Never, just easygoing. But my oldest brother, he is, and to this day, I still find him that way.
So will you tell me, you did a lot of preparation for meals. Will you tell me what a dinner time or a supper time was like in your family?
Well, meat, potatoes, and bread, potatoes, and gravy, or meat and potatoes was that was probably 3 times a day. Well, not meat, not potatoes so much, but meat, I would say 3 times a day. But potatoes, for dinner, that had to be a pretty good meal. But then for supper, it had to be really good. And it had to be, baked bread or cream sauce or fried chicken in the summertime. My mother raised the chicken, raised her own chickens when they were big enough that we could, butcher them. That was what we had chicken for about a couple of weeks, I suppose, until we were all fed up with chicken. But they couldn't keep any meat because we had no refrigeration. We had a cellar. My mother canned a lot of food, like beef. She canned it. So in the summertime, you'd go to the cellar and you'd get a jar of beef or whatever, sausage or whatever, and that's probably what we'd fix.
So did you ever help with the butchering of the chickens?
Oh, absolutely, yes, I did. Oh, yeah, that was one of my jobs. I hated it, but I did it. I always cut the heads off and let the chicken hop all over. My mother didn't like that. She don't. Oh, you're not supposed to do that. Of course, it got bloody all over. But I don't know what difference it made. But when she was around, we'd cut the heads off, but we'd hang on to the chicken so it wouldn't get all bloody. And but I remember doing. And then of course you dip them. You had to skull them and pick the feathers. And I usually had to do that. My mother usually did the cleaning, the rest, take the guts out and stuff like that. Although did it. I could do it, and I did it. But when she was around, I didn't have to do that. The scalding and the picking the feathers, I did, yeah. But the rest, she did.
Did you ever help her with the canning?
As far as the preparing the stuff, probably cleaning the jars or wiping them or something like that, I probably had to do that, yeah. But as far as preparing the stuff for the salt, whatever goes in it, I don't think I ever did that. The pickles, yes, I remember, filling the jars and stuff with pickles and stuff, cleaning them and dealing and whatever had to be done. But she did most of that. Put all the ingredients in, the garlic and whatever went in. She did most of that. I never did it by myself. She did all that.
Did she have a pretty large garden then when you were growing up?
An average sized garden. But the thing was, it hardly ever rained. So to raise a garden, I remember a garden was probably 4 or 5 blocks away. They started a new plot. It was beside the creek where the running water was, but they never had a pump that they could pump the water from the creek into the garden. So she had a garden, but nothing like I raised, because she couldn't water it, she couldn't sprinkle it or anything, But that's the way it was. Since there was no electricity, they couldn't have a pump. How would you run it? So it was hard. And when she did have, well, she grew the stuff. She grew everything that we grow now, beets, but I don't. It didn't grow very good. It just didn't produce.
Who tended to the garden?
Oh, all of us did. I think the whole family. I know, and the reason I say that, the 4th of July was one of my greatest holidays in growing up as a little boy. And I remember on the 4th of July, my brothers, the older brothers, and anybody that followed, one of the things that we did on the 4th of July morning is we either picked the bugs off the potatoes or we hoed the potatoes. And before we could do that, before we could go to town to celebrate the 4th of July, this is one job that had to be done. And boy, we got up pretty early on the 4th of July to do that. But that was one job that had to be done. I don't know, maybe my folks knew that by telling us that's what you have to do, they knew that it was going to get done. If they'd have told us on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, you've got to do that, we probably wouldn't have done it until the following week. But we knew that we had to do that before we could go to town. And going to town on the 4th of July was one of our greatest holidays as growing up from, I suppose, 4 years old to 12 years old. Because we could go there and then we'd see our cousins and we could just do anything we wanted to. But that was one job that we had to do. But the rest of the job, hoeing and weeding and stuff like that, we all pitched in to do that.
Okay, we're gonna talk a little bit about your experience with the war. You mentioned briefly that you served. How were you drafted? What was the draft like?
Well, we get a notice in the mail from the Selective Service that you report for a physical. So on a certain day, so you get to town, get on the bus, they take you to Fargo, and you go through a physical like you do when you go to the doctor. You get all kinds of physical. So you come home. A couple of weeks later, you get a notice. You're either accepted or you're rejected. So if you're accepted, you just sit and wait, see what happens. I don't remember how long it took from the time that I was accepted until I finally got my notice to leave, which was September the 17th to September the 18th of 1951. I left our home to go to the military. I left my home, got on the bus, went to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and that's where I got processed into the Army. And what an experience that was. You wake up in the morning and you'd go out, they'd call you out, so you'd line up. Sometimes they'd call your name, sometimes they didn't. And when you left with a bunch of other people, like 3 or 4 other guys from your own community. And when you were at this reception center, every once in a while they'd call out one of your friends. Oh, he goes there, he ships there. Pretty soon you're sitting there and you wonder if they called you and you didn't hear it. So you start worrying, did they call my name and I didn't hear them? So you wonder if you're AWOL, absent without leave, which is a serious thing. Anyway, So one day they call your name, and okay, then you go. And then from there I went to Missouri, Leonard Wood, Missouri. We went by a troop train from Fort Sheridan, Illinois, which is right out of Chicago, to St. Louis, Missouri. Every once in a while, we'd drive along on this train, and the train would stop, and I don't know, I think the conductor went out and shot fins or whatever they did. But that's the way it was. And we got to Fort Lewis at midnight. We got on the bus and went out to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which was, I don't know, it was dark and late. When we got there, got off the bus, and they had to go process it and get our bedding. And my gosh, you were so tired. But anyway, so the next morning, probably 6 o'clock, they call out, everybody get up, out, we got to check you, whoever, So they'd call you out, and you'd get in line. Pretty soon they'd call your name. Here, this went on for days. And finally, okay, here you're going to be assigned to a company. Okay, here's where you start your training. So you start your training going up every morning, going out walking or hiking or shooting or whatever. And then, of course, I got this thing with my shoulder, and I couldn't do it. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor gave me a notice to report back to my commander, tell him that for me to carry a gun. Well, a weapon. You don't never say gun on the service, you call it a weapon. Because if you said gun, you'd probably had to do 10 push-ups. So pretty soon you learn not to say gun, it was a weapon. Anyway, so I hung around there for about, I think the training, the 8 weeks was the basic training. Well, I hung around there for 8 weeks doing nothing but clean barracks and go out on a hike once in a while. But I'd always be the last one in the bunch because I was the only one that didn't have a weapon. So one day they assigned me to the company there in Fort Leonard Wood, and I was working in the reception center where all these new recruits were coming in, and my duty was to type up a list of all the recruits and also give them an orientation of what they can expect in the next couple of days, I really liked that because I got to see everybody that came from home. And of course, when I was giving the orientation, they all came, whoever knew me, came up and talked to me afterwards, which was pretty nice when you were in the Army, And my grandson now, he's counting the days. He's only gone for 2 weeks or 2 months, and he's already counting the days. He says, my gosh, Nathan, what would you do if you were in the service where you wouldn't know when you're going to come home? So I know exactly what he's going through. Anyway, I was in Fort Lewis there, or Fort Leonard Wood for, I think I was there 18 months. And then they shipped me out I was supposed to go to Korea. The Korean War was still going on. And they shipped me to Seattle where I was supposed to go to Korea. And I think in February, you had to have 9 months left before they discharge you. When I went in, you were in for 2 years. So by the time I got to Seattle to go to Korea, I had less than 9 months left. And there was a ruling that came out that said if anybody had less than 9 months, they couldn't ship you to Korea. So what a relief that was, although I still didn't know if I was going or not. And the reason I didn't go is because my records got lost. I wasn't paid while I was out there for about 5 months. I was going with my wife now, and she used to send me some money to buy some tobacco that I could roll my own cigarettes or probably buy a pack or two because I didn't have any money. I wasn't getting paid for 5 months. So that's how it was. And then anyway, I got assigned out there to a company after I got to a reception center again out there, and that's how I finished my Army career. So that was my Army experience. I got discharged on September 17th of 1953, came home and got married in October. I didn't have a job. I was looking for a job. And one day a guy says, why don't you ask for a certain priest for a job? Maybe he could tell you where to go to find a job. So I did. I went to this priest and asked him if he didn't know where I could find a job. And he sent me to the director of the Unemployment Compensation Division in the Capitol building. It was on the 16th floor of the Capitol building. And I went there, and sure enough, they hired me. And I was there for 32 years.
There's one other story that that you shared with us when we were off camera that if you wouldn't mind, I'd like you to share on camera. Okay. The first time you came to Bismarck, what was that like? Oh,
the first time I came to Bismarck, I remember we were 5 or 6 years old. I know we came up in a Model A Ford. It was raining. And we came as far as to Sterling. And my folks says, "You see that big building way out there? Yeah, that's the Capitol." Oh my gosh! Couldn't wait till I got there because I couldn't believe a building could be that tall. And 17 or 18 floors. That was pretty big in, when was that? Probably 1940. Who knows? Maybe 40, less 35 or whatever. Anyway, and we got to Bismarck and drove up to the Capitol. Capitol was way out of town then. And I stood beside that building and I looked up and I could not imagine a tall building like that. And like I said, I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And where did I ever know then that later I was going to work there? I worked there in the 17th floor. That's why I started in the 17th floor. I never knew that. But life could be something else.
I now have some concluding questions regarding your childhood to wrap up the interview. The first one is, when you think back to your childhood, what is one of the scariest memories you have?
I was always scared, like I said earlier, on a Sunday morning, I was always glad to go to church because even if there was a cloud, I was always scared of the weather. Because I went through a tornado. We had a tornado in my life when we lived on the farm. And I knew it was a tornado because the way it uprooted the trees, the way it twisted our windmill over, and it blew up some of the buildings. So I knew it was a tornado. We didn't probably at that time know what a tornado was like, but that was a tornado. And so the scariest was always, and especially when we had little chickens. My mother said, if it rains, you get to get these chickens in. And that was probably the scariest is when I was home alone and clouds came up, looked like a storm coming up. I think that was my scariest times.
Do you remember how old you were when that tornado?
Yeah, I was probably 12, I suppose.
Did it do a lot of damage to you?
Oh yeah, it did a lot of that, and it came like around 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock, and it was absolutely. And I know we have a basement. We lived in the basement, which was good. It was absolutely pitch dark, and we had no electricity, to turn the lights on. It was absolutely pitch dark, and this wind was blowing. Oh gosh, we didn't lose anything. We probably lost the broken windows and stuff like that. But as far as the house, I don't know. We probably lost shingles. I don't remember, but yeah, it was scary. It was a bad storm. Although we had a root cellar made of cement. No tornado would have ever damaged that, but we never went in there. Either my folks were home too. Everybody was home. Either my folks didn't get there fast enough, or we just didn't go there. But if we'd have went there, nothing could have. I think even a nuclear bomb wouldn't hurt that cellar. But anyway.
How about when you think back, what is one of your happiest memories from your childhood?
My happiest memories was the 4th of July. There was one of the times where I got to go and visit with some of my cousins in the city. We call the town Strasbourg, where we could, go on our own. We didn't have to hang on to our mother's apron or anything like that. We were on our own, and we had a few pennies in our pocket. And I think those were, to this day, I still cherish those as my best fun days of my childhood.
So what was 4th of July like in Strasbourg?
Well, you got to run races, and if you were lucky to win, you win some prizes, but sometimes everybody got a little something. So you got to do that, and if you were lucky to win the first prize, you got probably 50 cents or maybe $1, which was a lot of money those days. And of course, they had free stuff, like they had free ice cream for the kids, and of course we got to have a picnic with our folks. My parents we had a picnic. We had the watermelon and sausage and whatever went with a picnic, and that was pretty good stuff for coming from the farm to the city.
Were there fireworks?
Oh yeah, everybody had fireworks. Yeah, I had a lot of fireworks that blew up in my hand. Oh yes, everybody had fireworks. They were cheap, and oh yeah, and you could shoot them off any place. You could throw them anywhere you wanted to. There was no ordinance of where you could shoot them, but that was fireworks.